whose responsibility is it to share something that isn't working? Is it the person who's being impacted by it? Meaning that, is it the responsibility of the person who has the quote unquote complaint? Or is it the other person who should ask, okay, is everything okay? What's going on? Do better, continue doing.
That is a little bit of a tricky question. Ultimately, the answer is both, but let's add some nuance to that. The person who has a problem, a needs not being met, something like that. Whoever it is that has the problem, or let's say it might even be his problem. For instance, he might be leaving earlier and earlier because he's literally embarrassed about his performance. Like that actually happens. So one question I would ask if I were trying to figure out what was happening in that situation was, what was the sex like? Does he premature ejaculate? Does he have difficulty getting an erection? Like, do you feel satisfied afterwards? And if she says, well, he has difficulty and he tends to ejaculate early, and the sex really is only so. He might be getting up and getting out because he doesn't want to have a conversation about how poor that sex was, right? That's a possibility. There are, of course, a number of other possibilities as well, but you know, we would want to know what that is. So the problem might be his, and if the case in that case, if the problem were his, and the problem were I'm not performing, as good as I could be, then if he had the emotional maturity, he should be able to say to her, look, I'm sorry that I tend to leave early, and here's the reason why. He should be able to speak to that, right? Uh, Men, if you're worried about sharing things around performance anxiety with your woman, let me just tell you, my experience has been, and not just as an individual, but also as a coach who does this work, women in general are amazingly forgiving. If a woman actually cares for you, and you come to her and you tell her you're struggling with one of these things, in general, there's exceptions to everything, but in general, her reaction usually will be, how can I help you? Right? That's usually what the reaction is going to be. So don't worry about bringing that, to her. Now, not everybody who has a problem is going to speak up, right? So then the question is, well, is it the person who has the problem, or is it the person who is the problem? Like, which one should speak up? Well, okay, if the person who has the problem isn't speaking up, and you are on the other side of that, and you notice they have a problem, then it is your responsibility to check in with them and say, hey, I noticed something's going on for you. I'm not really sure what it is, but I can tell that it's definitely affecting you. It seems to be affecting us. It seems to be affecting the lovemaking. I'd love to have a conversation where we could sit down and figure out what's going on. Right. So that's why I say it's kind of both, because sometimes one person or the other, for whatever reason, doesn't want to speak up. And if they don't, well, what are your options? Ignore it while it sits there and builds resentment and festers, underneath the surface, or bring it to light, right? So that's ultimately, we need to get it into the light one way or another. And if the person who has the problem isn't the one doing it, then the other person might need to be the one to bring it to light. As always, of course, how you bring these things to light is important. If you're the one who has the problem, whether you're the man or the woman, you don't want to bring it to light by saying, let me tell you what you're doing. Here's what you're doing wrong, or here's what you never do, or why do you always do this? You don't want to get into the criticizing, the complaining, the blaming, because that never solves anything. That immediately puts the other person on the defense, right? And they're going to make a million reasons why. So, in the case of the story that you shared, uh, every time he's leaving earlier and earlier and earlier. So she has the problem, which is, the problem is you don't stay with me after sex, which, by the way, is what every woman wants, right? She doesn't want you to fall asleep. She doesn't want you to leave. She wants to know that you're still there with her, that she wants you to hold her and talk to her, whatever, that's slightly different, but that she wants aftercare is the point. So if she's the one that has the problem, uh, she should bring it up to him, but not in a way that's like, why do you always leave? Or you always leave. Maybe I should just leave the $100 on the table, right? Like that's going to start an argument, as opposed to saying, I'm really curious. I noticed that usually when we have sex, you tend to leave shortly thereafter. I'm just curious if there's a reason for that. I just want to let you know that what would feel really good for me is if you could stay and just hold me for a little while. Maybe we could talk a little bit about it, because that would make me feel more connected. That would make me feel like you actually love me and that you're here for me. It's a thing that I tell women all the time is, don't just tell a man what he did wrong, right? That's generally not going to work. But share with him what it is that you need first, and then include the emotion behind the need. And that's really key, because that's what gets to our heart, right? So if you just come to us and say, I don't like it when you leave, we might just be like, yeah, well, I needed to leave. Sorry. Right. But if she comes to us and says, it really makes me feel sad when you leave because I feel really disconnected. And we just shared this really deep, emotional, physical connection. And when you just leave like that, I feel abandoned and I feel like you don't love me. And I want to feel loved by you. Right. Now, if we really didn't love her and we were just using her, we might not care. But if we did actually care about her, we might go, oh, I had no idea that that's how you were feeling every time I left. Oh my God, I don't want you to feel that way. Okay, I'll stick around for at least 10 minutes, right?
When it comes, then you mentioned a good point, because this is something that I learned the value of. Like, I always had an appreciation of it, but as I've gotten older and I've talked to more women, I've talked to more people like you who are coaching people when it comes to their sex life, their sexuality, their intimacy, it opened my eyes to things that maybe it wouldn't have previously, and that is the importance of foreplay and aftercare. When I spoke to a few women in the industry, they stressed the importance of it. And then, same thing with you, they stressed it. And then when I started to have conversations with, let's say, acquaintances or their guests or their friends, I began to notice that it appeared that men in general undervalued foreplay and aftercare. And then maybe women were overvaluing foreplay and aftercare. In the people, the clients that you work with, do you see a gap in between the importance and the value of aftercare and foreplay between men and women?
Oh, definitely. Women will definitely put a high value on both of those things. Definitely. Uh, I mean, most people are aware of foreplay, right? Uh, so let me put that on hold for a second, because I'm going to talk about that when I come to talking about the men. Women generally will put a high value on foreplay and aftercare, hands down across the board. It's kind of an exception, the ones that don't. Men, on the other hand, will generally put a lower value on the foreplay and often aren't even aware of the concept of aftercare. Like, it's just true. A lot of men don't. Oh, you mean I'm supposed to do stuff afterwards? I thought afterwards I could just like flick on the game, go have a beer, whatever. Aftercare is not even on a lot of men's radar, unfortunately. So not only do they not value it, but a lot of times they're completely unaware that they should be doing it to begin with. So yes, I definitely see a big disparity between how the two of them value it. But for men, again, we tend to see things through the lens of being a man. And for us in general, we don't need as much foreplay, especially if we're young. As we get older, that changes a little bit. Our bodies, as we age, they don't respond the way they used to. We might need a little bit more, foreplay and stimulation. But in general, we don't need a whole lot. And so we were like, well, what's the problem? I got an erection. Like, you don't have to worry about getting an erection. Your genitals are just always working. Well, that's not actually true. Right? There's that process of vaginal tenting that needs to happen. They will actually get an erection, so to speak, as well, in a sense that their clitoris, which is not just that little piece that you can sometimes see sticking outside, but has legs that go down the sides of the outer labia, right? That all needs to engorge with blood. And so it will actually swell when she gets turned on. What will also happen in along with those two things is lubrication will start to be produced. So until the tenting happens and the swelling happens and the lubrication happens, sex is either not really possible or not really pleasurable for her. right? So she needs that. That is an absolute physical need outside of the emotional and mental need. That is a physical, biological need that she has in order to really be ready and open for sex. So, and there's not really a shortcut around that. So, men, you just need to realize that, not only does she emotionally need that longer foreplay, right? Because that's how she's starting to connect with you and bond with you. But physically, she also needs that in order to get her body ready to even be able to take you in. So you just have to be aware of that. And you have to realize that it's not just, oh, she's needy, right? Like these are actual things. You just have to understand how a woman's body works versus how a man's body works and accommodate.